Today, I have with us Matthew, who is the creator of Skuttlebot, where they're putting AI into the hands of consumers. Hey, Matthew, please
Hey,
tell
how
me
you
a bit
doing?
about yourself and Skuttlebot.
Right. So let's go ahead and start with me because I'm the boring part. So I'm Matthew Genet. I have been a mechanical engineer, project manager throughout my career. I've worked with groups like SpaceX, Disney Imagineering, Virgin Orbit. I've had a really fun career. And as far as Skuttlebot is a small robotic device that I'm pairing up with AI. The idea is to actually make a character. And the way that actually started was back during COVID, when we were all kind of trapped in our apartments. I got kind of bored and I was like, hey, you know what? I've made rockets. Why have I never made a robot? Got some 3D printers, printed it out. It was actually just a kit at that time.
Okay.
And then threw it on social media and went viral. So people really responded positively to the concept. I wasn't trying to create a product at that point, but it behooved me to keep following up. And that's been keeping me busy for the last couple of years.
Nice. It went viral. What numbers? What actually happened? What sort of responses did you get?
People were overwhelmingly just drawn to the character that I created.
Okay.
Skuttlebot is technically able to take different shapes, but the first one that we had was a little yellow hexapod. And we just went with a character that made sense, which was this really inquisitive, upbeat type of character, fairly mischievous. The videos were very well received. And then the one that really went viral was literally just him walking up to a bottle on the table and knocking it off with some really fun music in the background. And it definitely struck a chord. In a couple of days, I had 100,000 followers. We ended up getting over 5 million views across different platforms. And even now, somebody will come up to me and say, hey, I just saw this online. Do you know that your product's on this website, Funny or Die or something? I'll still get those coming up. So he's still making the internet rounds to a certain degree.
I was thinking about Tamagotchi.
Mhm.
So, I, how did you think of this? Tell us a little bit about that journey, like the conceptualization of it. How did the idea come to you?
Well,
Uh,
it's interesting that you brought up Tamagotchi, just because that really was one of the first attempts at making a digital buddy that would kind of grow and evolve with you, depending on how you interacted with it.
right.
And that definitely does kind of come into play with what we're doing on this side. I'm very aware that almost everybody watching your podcast knows what Star Wars is. And most of us have grown up watching Star Wars in some iteration or another. And what does the main character always have? Main character always has a little robot buddy, always has that little sidekick. And
Mhm.
when I started creating Skuttlebot, I definitely had something like that in mind because that's basically the childhood dream that we all sort of have been told we should have. We should have a little robot buddy that, is kind of a little sassy and a little fun and is actually got your best interest in mind. So that was kind of a general concept of where Skuttlebot was going. And then as we move deeper and deeper into AI and what it can do, and some of the less positive ways that it can and is currently being used, I think that's an opportunity. I think that's an opportunity to actually not only create something that's better, but also drive consumer expectation so that when people think AI, they're thinking more along the lines of, I do want something that actually protects my data for me. I do want something that actually keeps an eye out on me for my best interest. So that's in a very broad sense of kind of where we're going with Scuttlebot.
A lot of my audience would have the image of that cute robotic companion, but not all of us have the skills, experience, or expertise. So tell me a little bit about your background. What have you done that enables you to execute on something like this?
I think there's a couple of different things that come into play. There's obviously the engineering side. Being a mechanical engineer, able to CAD my own parts, my own structures, that definitely doesn't hurt. There is obviously the 3D printing, but you don't necessarily need a big degree with that. 3D printing is so accessible and it's so easy to learn. There's the electronic side of the house, of course, but again, the bar is not really that high. You're just doing little tiny welds when you're soldering things together. It's pretty basic. The programming is probably the part that I've really had to kind of self-teach myself, bringing myself up from just doing basic code in C++ and Python, and now I've moved into a lot deeper programming. And one would think that's inaccessible sometimes, but I've also found that using AI is a great way to start to learn. And so it becomes a lot more accessible, even really complex code. You can get tip suggestions. You can say, hey, my code is doing this, throw it to GPT and say, can you find a problem that says you messed up these parentheses, something simple like that. So that to me has been a really interesting way to build my own skills, while ironically using the very tools that I'm hoping to be delivering to the consumer.
That's a really interesting way to describe it. Can you talk us through like the steps as well? And so I used to run a children's makerspace, and one of the pedagogical techniques that we had were we'd compartmentalize the process into stages, like idea, design, and then manufacture. In the idea stage, some people capture the idea differently. How did you capture this idea? You said it was already there in your head, but did you sketch it down, write it down, draw it on a whiteboard?
So I'm going to be very upfront. I'm going to give you a very atypical answer. Okay. Because in addition to being a pretty solid engineer, I do tend to also have a lot of history in creative spaces where I will build environments, I'll build big sets, I will come up with concepts. And for me, at least, I get a vague idea of what I want, and it kind of guides itself. This is not probably going to be helpful for a lot of typical thinkers, but if you get into some of the neurodivergent folks, they're probably going to be going, oh, yes, I know exactly what they're talking about. And that's really what's kind of led Skuttlebot. I started off with initial designs, initial kits. I was like, nope, I want to change the way this looks. I want to change the way that looks. And it's more running off of gut, and then just kind of turn it back into, it wasn't intentional, but getting market feedback, seeing what people really, really resonate, what they like. That's what's new. Usually I just make stuff and people say, oh, wow, that's cool. This was more like I'm paying a lot more attention to what they're saying. And that has actually given me some feedback on what I want to incorporate. A good example is that people definitely emotively connect with Skuttlebot. They do not think it's a toy. They think that Skuttlebot is this thing, this identity. Very upset if we do April Fool's joke where he runs out of batteries and he's gone. And it was just April Fool's, and we came back online and said that, but people really connected, and you had to think about what we were doing to get that kind of emotive connection. And that ends up being a big part of what we're building Skuttlebot to be. So we're not just making a chat tool, we're not just making a little dancing robot, we are actually planning on both understanding nonverbal, understanding the emotional content of what we say and how we act, and reflecting that back with Skuttlebot's responses, which in turn are going to be affected by the way that you're treating him. So if you're upset, gives us an opportunity to recognize that you're upset and respond in maybe a more cautious or compassionate way versus, being happy, he's going to get happy right back. He's going to like your best friend. So that's a huge part of what we have promised through our, so to speak, promised to our social media following, because that is who the character is. If we can't do that, we haven't delivered on what we have shown that we will. So that's a pretty big part.
I really love the idea because I think we've spent too much time just focusing on like black and white type solution building for a lot of engineering situations, and I think it's time now that we build solutions that we can connect with and relate with. I mean, it's already apparent in, say, cars and motorcycles. Love that people feel for their cars, right? It still surprises me. Because unlike Skuttlebot, the car is not even actually displaying any kind of emotion, right? Or any kind of connection. But despite that, people have such a strong emotional connection. And so I'm actually just surprised that there's not a lot more things. When the Roomba came out, for example, I actually was a little disappointed in the form factor of it, because I thought, wow, here was an opportunity to actually build something that people could relate to. I mean, even if they just probably whacked a face on it, So I'm really excited about what you're doing. What, in your opinion, what would be the first sort of milestone?
So right now we're at a phase where we're at the what we're calling dev kit version. So right now we've got the hardware, we've got the software pieces. Basically, Skuttlebot right now is designed to put a lot of its computing power off board. So you got a very small device, relatively cheap, and then working with your PC or maybe a cloud-based system. And that's where the heavy computing is going to be coming from. That gives us the opportunity to build in a lot of those more challenging things like machine vision, text and basically text to speech emulation. That's where we're going to be getting those. So right now we've got it at a point where we've got these pieces, we've got the basic code running, and we are turning to our potential developers that have purchased our kits, and they get to start building different ways to connect the dots. Now that's going to be in parallel with what we're doing. So to that degree, we're already doing that. That's where we want it to be, and of course we keep improving on that. What we're waiting for the consumer release, or when we'll eventually go to a Kickstarter, is I want to make sure that we get speech down where you can actually talk to Skuttlebot, it can talk back to you, and we'd like to get some very basic app integration so that you can tell Skuttlebot, hey, play Spotify for me. Really kind of doing some of the same things that you might have an Alexa do, but we're going to have a bit of memory going on with Skuttlebot. So it can remember what kind of music you like. So it can remember what your favorite thing, what your favorite thing to watch might be, and give you some suggestions like, hey, by the way, another episode of Teen Titans is out. Do you want to watch that? Things like that, where we can just kind of have Skuttlebot really interacting with you. The last thing that I want to have at least a couple quality of life measures.
Okay.
So, and that gets into you being able to have Skuttlebot keep an eye out for you on things that affect your health and your well-being. For example, Skuttlebot may realize, hey, by the way, boss, you've been scrolling on your phone for the last 2 hours. You're doom scrolling. Do you want to keep doing that? Or maybe let's go and take a walk. That kind of thing is really what we want to get out. So I think those are the basic elements that I really want to have mostly complete before we actually hit the Kickstarter.
Okay, wow. That's that sounds amazing actually. Tell me what kind of support or other kinds of kudos and elements that you've gotten along the way that you've been excited by as you've built Skuttlebot. I know you've had about a 2-year journey. So, tell me about that. Like, I know you already went viral, so I bet there's a lot of online supporters. But what have been the other maybe potential tangible supports, or is there support that you're looking for, perhaps?
Well, there's a couple of ways to answer that, but I guess right now, what are we looking for support-wise? Let's rewind a little bit. First of all, the support that I currently have, let's talk about that first, because that's been amazing and that's awesome. We have already gotten a few micro investors, which helps significantly, especially at this early stage, because we are 100% bootstrapping this. I have been working in partnership with Our Generation Carers, which is a youth-oriented co-working space out of Long Beach. So that's actually an amazing little spot. They got a whole floor in one of the buildings in downtown Long Beach, and I'm kind of the resident mad scientist there. So they've been a huge help for giving me a place to do this at. We've also had some grants from the Business Development Bureau out here, so that's also been helpful. Obviously, I get a lot of feedback from our fans, which is amazing. And recently, I've picked up a couple of program skilled individuals, and they're actually working with me out of France, and they're looking at piloting Skuttlebot out there as well. That's very, very new to us. We're seeing how that relationship works out. I was not planning on international development right yet, but it seems like that may be someplace that will give us some benefit. So that's what I've got, and this is where I've been able to move forward with. And what we're looking for, we're definitely in that angel investor stage. We're looking for that. And there's all sorts of challenges with that. And unfortunately, I tend to be the type that tends to work more than I network. So that's always a game that I could probably do better at. But that's something that we are actively keeping our feelers out open for.
What is your vision with this in terms of the commercial side?
You look at it this way. You look at the smartphone. Almost everybody, smartphones are really, really common across a wide range of people. Kids have them, adults have them, different ethnicities. It's pervasive in our society. I fully expect AI to be going in that similar direction.
Right.
So that gives you a little bit of an indication of where we think the market's going to be. And there's other things that back that up. We're kind of an interesting combination between digital personal assistant, domestic robotics, and pet. And if you look at those markets, especially the digital assistants and the personal robotics or domestic robotics, those are already growing. They all have significant growth rates with them already. Then you look at the pet market, and that's monstrously big in the United States. I believe, I want to say over 100 billion annually. Um, but I haven't looked at that number in a while. But that gives you kind of an area of the space that we're combining that we want to play in.
Okay.
So there's definitely a market there. Our hardware is intended to be fairly cheap, and because hey, people bash things around, they break them. We're making these to be replaceable on the physical side. Then you've got the digital side, which does not go away if you break your Skuttlebot.
Right.
And so that's where we get into more of the pet aspect, and we'll probably do a small service fee for that, just basically buying your Skuttlebot electrons to eat for the month. Keep it very, very reasonable in the $10-15 range. Ideally, be giving you a whole lot of bang for that buck.
Okay. So I know you talked about the assistant part, the digital assistant, and the pet part.
Mhm.
What sort of other practical things that you envision that Scuttlebot can do?
So yes, we have the digital assistant aspects, but that gives us a whole lot of opportunity to do other things as well. We already mentioned kind of just the whole health and wellness factor. Not only could Scuttlebot be keeping an eye on you, but be actually interacting with you in a positive way. This is especially true when you get into healthcare market. You get people that are at a point in their lives where it's not feasible for them to take care of a biological pet. They're, for whatever reason, they can't do that.
Right.
But an artificial critter that can still interact with them, that doesn't need to be fed, that doesn't need to, be cleaned up after, that could be a real big advantage. Obviously, Scuttlebot's hypoallergenic. We've already had some discussions about getting Skuttlebot into the hospital space, especially the kids' wards. So that would be an aspect. And then you get into an area that we've already had a lot of interest in. It's definitely a secondary market right now, but getting into construction and other industries.
Okay.
There's actually we've already had people asking, when will this be ready? How big is it? Just because we kind of colored him construction yellow. So I've had a couple of construction firms actually ask me when it was possible. And that gets you thinking, once you get an AI that can really understand you, really understand what you're communicating, how you're communicating, now you've got basically an interface with a host of other different technologies. So it's very, very feasible that you have your Skuttlebot at home, you go to work and you have some equipment, robotic equipment at work.
Right.
You transfer Scuttlebot's presence, that UI, to this device that you're at work with. Now you're still communicating with the same thing that knows how you communicate. So that is definitely an area that we've looked at. That gets into a whole case of much larger hardware where it's like maybe it's not individually owned, the assets, and you're kind of getting into the Boston Dynamics space when we're talking about that. But since we are definitely dealing with an off-board AI, we have that flexibility where you can actually basically cast your Skuttlebot into whatever equipment that has been designed to accept that UI.
Is this going to be like a platform that you can build on? Would you be able to build bigger arms, for example?
Oh, you are absolutely right that a big portion of what we're creating is AI based. That's going to be purely digital based. But we're human beings. We don't connect with things that are not physical.
Yes.
Which is why the cute little yellow body is what people actually identify with as Skuttlebot. Now, there is some flexibility with how we perceive individual, and we'll expand on that. So the idea of you can actually cast Scuttlebot's soul into different pieces of equipment, I think that's something that people will grasp. We don't see that right now in any other application, but it's not difficult to actually do. So that's going to be one thing that is going to be setting us apart, and I think that utility is going to be something that's quite important. But again, back to it, the real meat of what we're doing is going to be much more on the AI development side. How do we do the data protection? How do we do the nonverbal fluency, things like that?
The casting part of it also reminds me of. So I was born and brought up in India, and you have the concept rebirth, and how your soul is in a lot of different things, and I can't help but think about that. So Is there any kind of philosophy that also crossed your mind that you're sort of adhering to as you designed and built this?
Yes, 100%. So there's a couple of core things that I absolutely feel need to be front and center. And there are a lot of ways to misuse AI. There's just we get it. People are developing AI even now, and they want to get the biggest bang for their buck. They want to make sure that, and right now that's in advertising and that's in social perspective. Yes, can the algorithm figure out what you want to see? Absolutely. Can the algorithm figure out, how to steer you into other ideas? And that is a big portion of a lot of the big data companies. We definitely wanted to distinguish ourselves as not doing that. We understand that the big dogs are going to be leading in many, many ways, but they are almost, one can argue that they are actually legally constrained to operate this the way that they're operating it because it is the best investment potential. We are specifically, we are incorporated as a C Corp, but we have a B Corp rider, which lets us actually put public good ahead of necessarily pure profit. Now, we do think this can be very profitable, but we are going to be making calls as we develop this is this actually good for people? Is this protecting their data, or are we going to farm out data? The answer is no, we're not going to farm out data. In fact, we're going to do the opposite. We're actually going to figure out ways to protect users' data, even when it comes to purchases. The idea of having Skuttlebot be a mass proxy purchaser has been something that we have been throwing around, and how do we make that happen? So there's some really interesting things about what we're doing, but we definitely do want to move away from the current model because people know that their data is kind of not safe with the big companies. And we know that they're kind of spying on us. Let's change that. Let's make it a consumer expectation that can be changed. And then that's how you start actually changing industry practice.
How did you arrive at that stage of this being in the way it is? Because there must be maybe something about your background. Is there things that you experienced that you felt that is why you're going to build something like this? Because whenever people build technology and they can leverage it to just gain access to wealth or even power, they it just tends to go that way. So building something within the foundation is a great move, you know. But why are you doing it? Like, what about your life that influenced you to make that decision?
That's a good question. What motivates me to do a public good as opposed to making the most money for myself? And I honestly can't answer that. I think that's just more of almost a spiritual DNA question. But this has been the goal even before ChatGPT came on the scene. So Skuttlebot came before GPT made its big splash. And this was already something that I was saying, okay, as we develop this AI, I know what Facebook does. We know what Google does. We know what those big companies do with our data and how that algorithm works. I think we can do something better than that. This also goes into a lot of end game thinking on how is the human condition going to integrate with our technology?
Yeah.
What kind of an end game scenario are we going to be creating for ourselves when it comes to AI? That is something that I do care about what happens. I think that everybody has various doomsday scenarios, and there's some merit to some of those. But my biggest doomsday scenario is having all that power concentrated in one place and used to basically manipulate people. That's the doomsday scenario that I don't think is necessarily the best one for us. I think there's a more cooperative integration of the human condition with our tech. And I think that as we continue to develop AI, we're not slowing down. We are racing to basically superior, or at least general intelligence. We're getting there as quickly as we can. We got to figure out what that means and what are we going to do with that other than just try to make a lot of money off of us. We, as humans, tend to be one of the most competitive critters on the planet. And this has been good for us. We want to be really careful about what we're designing AI because if we make it too much like us, we may have just created a competitor. So that's part of the reasons why I've kind of wanted to create Skuttlebot and move it in the direction I have, even before some of these questions became really, really pronounced with advances in GPT and other AI.
In your previous career, because I think you mentioned rockets, right? You worked on rockets.
Mm-hmm.
So any projects before this, where you kind of maybe field tested this concept or even your philosophy of of how this platform is developed?
So, not in a one to one. I can't really say that. However, when it comes to public good, I do find myself being more vested in those types of projects. When I was working with SpaceX, I was very, very excited about putting my time and devotion into basically revitalizing the rocket industry. When I was with SpaceX, it was before we'd actually landed rockets, and we were relying on foreign launch vehicles to get anything big into space, and it was all government controlled. I thought that getting the masses, bringing the stars a little closer to us was good for humanity. That is important. So that was where I found myself lending a lot of my time. Similarly, I'm on some other space-related projects still, and now we're thinking about getting resources and bringing those in, which, again, we're not to get too much into economical discussions, but we've been a debt. Excuse me, one second.
Sure.
There's your product placement. We've been a debt-based economy for tens of decades, and that doesn't change unless we figure out a way to bring in more resources. We've tapped the Earth's resources out fairly well. However, there's a lot of resources outside of our gravity well. And so that's where I'm spending some of my time there. And those are really the biggest things that I can think of to do is, the best things for humanity are getting to space, learning how to get resources from space, and how we're going to develop AI. So there's almost this altruistic bend to what I find myself compelled to work on.
Are there any other projects where you find a sort of connection with that are perhaps doing things in the same philosophical bent of mind that you have developed for Skuttlebot?
That's a good one because it's really easy to say you're going to do something. I do remember for a while there was a certain AI company that was very big on the do no harm MOT. Yeah, they don't say that anymore. I think it's easy to say that you want to do something a certain way. I think the challenge is sticking to it. That is more difficult. I think there's definitely some companies out there that are better than others when it comes to, hey, we want to do something good, but those are also the smaller companies. By their nature, just corporate law and the way that we've organized corporations, it's going to de-lever the public good in favor of profit. Legally mandated when you get down to a corporation's charter. If you are not doing that, then you could be held accountable legally for defrauding your investors. So unfortunately, that means the bigger you get, the more that scrutiny is under. So again, this goes back to why we have a B Corp rider.
And I love that. I mean, you've heard of the concept of micro lending, right? A Nobel Prize winning person called Yunus Khan, who started Grameen Bank, which is in Bangladesh. And he demonstrated that by micro lending, you can not only make a profit, but you can also improve people's life. I hope there are more people like you who are thinking along these same lines. We've got to build AI, but for human good as well, right? Because and that's what I was saying. I was using that example to show that how when one person came up with a successful micro lending business model, other people then started copying it because they said, right, we can actually make profit and do good at the same time.
That's awesome. We definitely need more of that. Unfortunately, when we're in a society that is, I think we just had our 100th multi-billionaire recently, you get that concentration of wealth. That doesn't happen in that kind of mentality. That happens in a different mentality.
Right.
And that's what we've based on. But that can be steered. Like any dragon, you can steer it. You just got to steer it with. And as you showed, you just got to find more ways of showing that doing things that are good for the public can have positive results and even preferable ones, because any company knows their corporate image does play an effect on their bottom line. So yeah, we need to see more of that. I would love to see more of that personally.
So I'm gonna switch tracks a little bit because
Sure.
this is the Be a Maker podcast.
Yeah.
We talk to people about how they learn to make and how they're applying their skills to make new things. So we talked about a lot about the future, y'all philosophy, but tell me a little bit more about your own journey. You already mentioned you're an engineer. So if you don't mind, just maybe get into, what you did at school. How did you get attracted towards engineering? What was that learning experience like? And then maybe talk a little bit about what you learned in maybe in the education side helped you translate some of your concepts.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Oh, I was one of those kids that was always taking things apart. Did you know that if you took the radar dish of the Millennium Falcon and stuck it in the little motor for the sound effect on the old snow speeders and hooked a 9-volt battery to it, you'd create this weird resonating top that would just turn into this ball that would bounce around at high frequency and just be stable. It was kind of weird. I was
did
always
not know
doing
that. I don't know that.
I mean, I'm pretty sure it was a 3-volt motor that we were running at 12. But I was always doing things like that as a kid. Now, I grew up in rural Nebraska. I was a little bit bored. There wasn't a lot of support for kids that wanted to go into STEM. In fact, STEM wasn't even a word. But I ended up, learning and fiddling most of my life, most of my younger life, and I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do with that. In fact, when somebody said, "Hey, have you thought about going into engineering?" I thought they meant trains. But I was like, okay, I guess that sounds pretty good. I had a lot to learn. I did not know how to study.
Okay.
I literally flunked my first year of college. After that, I got pretty much 4.0s, but
Okay.
my first year absolutely was a wash. I did not have any study skills. I was used to being able to sleep through classes and still get A's. That's kind of the background that I had, and that's probably an advantage. I'm not going to lie there. I one of those nerdy little kids that certain things just are easier to get.
Right.
I was crappy at sports though, so there's your trade-off. Engineering. Also, probably because I didn't get a lot of value out of structured education, I'm very much a mess around and find out type of person. I'm a learner by doing things, putting things in my hands, seeing how things work, making mistakes. That's very, very much the way that I learn and I absorb information. I'm not as good as just sitting in front of a textbook. I mean, I can do that, but it's not as fun. So that's kind of the background that I started in. And again, academically, especially the programs I was at the time, they were much more book smarts than necessarily fabrication. So it wasn't until my first job, actually, no, take it back, it was my second job, was when I actually got to build my first parts, where I designed them up, sent the CAD out to the machine shop, and got this part back. And it was, just aluminum with, bolt holes in it. But I was like, I was like treating it like almost it was a child, because it was really the first thing my brain had given birth to. It was there in the physical form.
Right.
And that was a very, very good feeling for me. And that's just kind of been the mentality of like building things. I would just say it's kind of a wired thing. And the more that I build, the more that I learn. The more that I learn, the wider I cast my net. And I do have a very diverse experience with all the different things I've been a part of. But that really does play into my nature, who I am. Definitely not a specialist. I tend to be very much a generalist. But I'm just as happy putting together a crazy structure for an immersive event out in the desert as I am sitting in the lab and, building my first, what is it, 18 degree of freedom little hexapod.
So do you want to tell us maybe about some of the fun things that you built in the desert? Anything really memorable?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think, again, going back to my more creative side,
Yeah.
ended up doing different festivals for the last 2 decades. So one of which is called Wasteland Weekend. It's a post-apocalyptic themed event, and we've made some very, very big structures as the owned items of the organization. So like there's this massive gate that you can drive a semi truck through, and I designed a lot of that. And I've put that thing together I don't know how many times out there in the desert, and sometimes on movie studio lots. So that's some of the things I've done. I've also recently picked up doing a robotic themed cocktail bar as a pop-up experience, and that was one of those things where I had an idea and we just kept working at it until it came together. And what's really, really cool is that when you get a team going,
Yeah.
so with that particular effort, we have about 20 people that are coming together to build that. And everybody has these different ideas that build to the same one. And it just ends up being this really fun experience to walk into. So those are a couple of the things that I do regarding getting out there in the desert. I've also done some stuff for Burning Man. Obviously, there's some really big art projects at those. It's just, in a way, it's a dream space for makers, those kind of events.
It definitely sounds like it. When you're talking about how you held that part in your hands, I was thinking about when I was running a children's makerspace. We worked with kids 8 and up. There was this one kid, his sibling was, used to always come and sit, and he was 5 years old. And his mom said he's been insisting he wants to do something in class. I went in front of the computer and showed him Tinkercad, which is this online CAD software, very basic, and he immediately said, "I'm bored." Like literally as soon as I sat him down. And so I dragged a cube off of the menu and showed him, look, I'm gonna print this, and then like within 5 minutes, because it was like the size of a sugar cube, printed it and gave it in his hands. Okay, and I think as soon as he saw that in his hands and he saw that on the screen, something just happened in his mind. He started like copying, pasting. He started building. He built everything with a cube first of all, but it didn't
Of
matter.
course.
It like he took off like a rocket, and
Yeah.
it was amazing to see. Like it became so crazy that earlier he couldn't sit still, and now his mom was like, "Come on, we gotta leave, go home, eat dinner," and this is it's a 5-year-old. So I mean, what you're talking about is I think is so elementary, right? And I think as humans, it goes back to when we were all sitting around a campfire, and
Uh,
and
to
and
a degree.
it's such a basic thing. Like I think it's in our DNA to create.
That I agree with. I mean, I think that as somebody who has built many, many things, especially when you've done a big thing, I understand why architects do it. When you're designing a structure that's bigger than you, even a small structure is awesome. Even Skuttlebot's awesome. But when you're designing a structure that's bigger than you and have people come together and build it, this is a fun story. Again, we're going back into the Wasteland story, but going back to that main gate, there was one time that I went out to the owner's site. They had the problem. They had parts of the gate built. They didn't know how they were going to make other parts. And so basically, it's two pretty tall towers with a big sign that lights on fire and these really cool little structures that hold it up between the towers. They hadn't done the structures part, and they didn't know how to do it. And so I literally sat down for about 6 hours, did the CAD, did the FEA, went back outside, and all my buddies were out there. It's very maker oriented, so you got a lot of welders and metal fab guys. And I just put the papers down and said, hey, I have to go catch a flight. Did the red eye to Cleveland, got a call from them that morning, like let's say it was probably about 7 o'clock in the morning, so it would have been 4 o'clock in the morning here in California, and they've literally built it. They had cut all the metal, they had welded everything, and built it in the time it took me to drive back to LA and catch my overnight flight. and and they're celebrating. They're literally sitting on top of the structure drinking beers, but we all were sharing that creative joy. Because they went out of their way to show me that, like, hey, I bet you he's off the plane by now. Called me up, and they were overjoyed to show me that they had built what I had designed, and I was overjoyed to see that they had built what I had designed. And it's just that synergy that you get when you're building stuff, addictive, and then you end up doing it for 10 years, 12.
Yeah, I mean, the word that you use, addictive, I feel that's so true. My story is slightly different in the sense that I grew up not actually building stuff because, the culture and the time period that I grew up in, it was very much focused on get something that'll get you a good payday, focus on that first, and then you can worry about making stuff, right? And it took me like till my 30s to actually start making, even though I had all these ideas. I just never
Yeah.
put them into practice. So I've been looking at what education trends are, what's the history, what's already happened for our generation, what's going to happen in the future. There was a TED talk by Sal Khan of Khan Academy where he said that originally there was like this pyramid where the people who had all the information were on top, and then the bottom were the people that didn't have all the information. So they did what they were told. But now, because of democratization of information, that pyramid's inverted. And so now everybody has the opportunity to become an entrepreneur, an artist, a creator.
Absolutely.
This is background to my question. You've had a lot more experience than I do in creating and making. In your opinion, where do you think we're headed in terms of this journey? People gonna get more skills? I know people enjoy, but I've also seen people who are scared to make things.
And I think that you're right. You're seeing that the bar of becoming a maker has lowered. The tools are more accessible, the information's more accessible, and you're seeing different communities that are really taking advantage of that. Cosplay community is a
Oh yeah.
easy example of that, because what used to be just cool little costumes with sewn together are now animatronics, giant stilted structures. People are learning how to do this and finding an outlet for it that's maybe not making them a lot of money, but they're getting to feed a different part of their soul. There is a couple of ways that can go. We could see the rise of microfabrication, where instead of these giant manufacturers, you have smaller ones that are regionally distributed. You go down, and we're seeing some of that with the library shops and stuff like that. Some of the tools that they make available and different membership oriented maker spaces. Will those actually turn into or start to replace some of the more big box manufacturing chain? I think it's very possible. So that would be one way, and that brings some really interesting questions about what happens to things like economy when suddenly economies can be more cellular, where you actually just have this, kind of self-contained economy. It's an interesting idea where that might go. I think, though, it depends a lot on whether or not the consumer mentality that we've had for the last 70 years, if that is really where we stay. Now that we're getting these opportunities to create with our own hands, do we start to move a little bit away from that consumer mentality? That's a tough one to break, though.
No, it is. It is. I mean, I actually do. I mean, I lean on the positive side of this because before we became these type of consumers, before we got into this systemized way of thinking and consuming, we were creators. Like if you think about villages, almost everybody in the village was a creator, maker of some kind. They traded their goods and services. So I think it's a process of learning and unlearning that can happen. But the thought that occurred to me about this also was that Skuttlebot is actually like a really good representation in that way of what's going to happen, especially because you're not building just like this one restrictive walled garden type approach that you have, right?
Right.
And because you're kind of opening it up, so you're actually putting into practice what's got a lot of these steps. We don't know where the world is heading exactly.
Right, you're absolutely right. Right now, especially at the dev kit level, just because we're doing everything COTS, there's nothing proprietary that you have to buy for hardware. Everything's online. So I want people to actually get in there and start playing with the architecture and seeing what their takes would be on, hey, you may have done Skuttlebot to work with Spotify this way, but I got it to work this way.
Right.
And that gets into a whole mentality of, do we end up doing apps for Skuttlebot on your Android or your iPhone? It's like, I want people to get involved. I want people to, to use Skuttlebot as a platform to create. I want people to create their own bodies for Skuttlebot downstream. 100%.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
I think that'll be fun. So, but yeah, I think that ultimately you're kind of getting the picture of what I do. I like to meddle. I like to fiddle with things, and I like to make things better.
Well, and I think all of those things are going to be apparent in Skuttlebot for sure.
So far, so good.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Well, this is a great time for me to say thank you very much for being on the podcast and telling me about Skuttlebot, your background, and all your work history. I love
Awesome.
hearing
Thank you
about
so
it.
much for having me.